I had $600,000 in credit card debt, all racked up from my business. How did I do that? So it was 2006 at the time. I was debt free. But then my industry, I do mortgages. My whole industry started sinking. Business was going horribly. The whole market was crashing. And ultimately, I was not making money. So naturally, I had to go somewhere just to get money to pay the bills, to run the business. I started cash advancing credit cards just to make payroll for the business, to pay the rent. Whenever I would go to do payroll, I would drive to Fifth Third Bank to cash advance my credit cards and then take that money, deposit into the company account, and then do payroll out of the company account. It was all business debt. And you say, well, Khash, how did you charge up $600,000? First of all, I had really good credit. And you name them, I had it. Bank of America, Citibank, my God, Capital One, American Express. I had $200,000. I had credit cards with $100,000 to $200,000 limits on those things. The next thing you know, fast forward 3 years, and it's March of 2009. I'm standing in front of my dishwasher. I'll never forget this one. I call Bank of America to say, hey, I have to cash advance the credit card. I need money, whatever it is. The operator puts me on hold. And then somebody else picks up the phone at B of A and they say, well, we have your balances in front of us. And at the present time, we're not going to allow you to do cash advances anymore, but you could charge the card if you want. Now, at the time, I knew I only had a few $1,000s left available on that thing. And I'll never forget this. I called my buddy Steven, one of my best friends. I wrestled with him in college. And I told him, I said, the fat lady's singing. They're not giving me any more money off this thing. And that's when just the musical chairs stopped. It just all stopped right there. Ultimately, I did not go bankrupt. My attorney, Dave, gave me the intake papers at that time. I'll never forget looking at those things, starting to fill them out. I never went bankrupt, but I was mighty close. I always tell people this. It took super difficult decisions, super difficult sacrifices, doing a lot of things that a lot of people tell me, well, Khash, I can't do that because I have children, or I can't do that because I want to have a life. Well, I got news for you. There's times in this world, you've got to make real tough decisions, okay? If you really want the hardest decisions to make, those are health decisions, okay? But when it comes to debt, managing time, certain things like that, there's certain times you just have to make difficult decisions. And if you're never willing to make those difficult decisions, you'll never get to the places you always dream about getting to. First, work harder, then work smarter. You always hear people talk about work smarter, then harder. No. First, you've got to work harder. You've got to put in the hours. You've got to extend your day out. You've got to come in a hell of a lot earlier, and you've got to stay a hell of a lot later. Vacations, days off, all of that stuff gets thrown right out the window. And I'm not talking for a period of 6 to 12 months. Try it for 5 or 10 years. When you're in a mountain of debt and you want to dig yourself out, the first thing you've got to start doing is working more hours. You've got to start working more just to start being more productive than you already are. Because clearly, when you're looking at bankruptcy, as I was, here was the problem. I had too many expenses and not enough income. One of the solutions, the first, is to raise your income. The only way to raise your income is by working more hours. Now, I'm in a sales job, so the truth is in sales, there's almost no limit as to what you can do. You just have to go out there and sell more of whatever you're selling. At the same time, if you work a regular job, let's just say you're a police officer or something, well, sometimes you got to work 50 to 60 to 70 hours a week. And maybe at your current job you can't, but you know what? Go pick up a second job, okay? You've got to work more hours. So the first thing that I embraced was the concept of working harder and then analyzing how I was doing to start working smarter. The second thing I did was I analyzed all of my expenses and I analyzed all of my income. Again, I had to stop the bleeding. I had to increase my income, but that took time, okay? I analyzed my expenses. I started carving out all of the things that I was spending money on. And again, I wasn't spending on vacations, trips, and things like that. I was spending it on different markets to go and do business in. And these were markets that I had committed 3 to 4 years and a lot of hundreds of thousands of dollars in to try to grow that clearly were not working. So I had to cut those markets out of my expenditures. So ultimately, the second thing you want to do is you want to cut your expenses. You've got to analyze your income and your expenses. And the first thing that has to go out the window are the expenses. By the way, that means you have to start living as skinny as you can too. You got to start making some real hard decisions to cut things out. And the problem is your circle of friends will be the first group of people that tell you you're living too meagerly, or whatever word you want to use for, like, you got to have a life. And I've heard that my whole life, my whole business career, of you got to live your life and you only live once and all this stuff. There's times in this world you have to make some difficult decisions, but cutting out your expenses is a major one that you have to do first when you're facing those times. The next step was I started paying down the small balances first. I know a lot of people will say, take your money and apply it to the highest interest rate debt. And on paper, that makes complete sense. But the one thing they don't factor in is the emotional or psychological side of debt. What I've always said is as I've paid off debt in my life, there's a sense of accomplishment, a positive feeling that you're actually getting somewhere. So I would start paying off the smallest debt first. And then what happened is, I call it the snowball effect. When you start paying off that small debt, you start feeling a sense of accomplishment, like I'm actually starting to get somewhere, and you actually start feeling like you can move this pile forward. Another thing I did was I called the credit card companies. I will never forget calling Citibank. Citibank, I think I owed them like $65,000 of the $600,000. Citibank, I called, I said, hey, close the card. And by the way, I had had that credit card for over 10 years at that time, never missed a payment. But I said, close the account, and I can only afford to make like a $100 payment per month. And what Citibank did at that time for me was they froze the interest. They had no more interest accruing. I couldn't use the account anymore, and I had to pay a minimum of $100 a month. So suddenly no more interest was accruing, and I can start really diving into that card and start paying the balance down. So I called all of my credit card companies. I had the accounts closed. Not all of them stopped accruing interest, but a lot of them that did, and that helped. But the biggest lesson of that part of what I'm telling you to do today is you have to have open communication with the creditors. I called all the credit card companies. I would call them regularly. And let me tell you this, it sucked, okay? It was so painful calling those places every damn week just to try to do something. It sucks. The whole experience overall sucks overall, okay? I've never met a human being who's been drowning in debt that said this is the time of my life, okay? But too bad. It was just a window of time. It wasn't as bad as you think. I mean, it's not. There's some experiences I've had that are a lot worse than drowning in debt. But ultimately, I made the phone calls. I opened the lines of communication. Some of the creditors were willing to work with me on that stuff. And that was the next step I followed. And this is probably the biggest thing I did. There's a saying that I've always heard that people say is, how do you eat an elephant? And that's one bite at a time, okay? Instead of looking at the totality of my situation, which means $600,000 of credit card debt, if I would have looked at that total amount and said, how in God's name am I going to pay that off in any length of time in this lifetime? I didn't look at the big picture. I looked at the small picture. I narrowed down everything, not narrowed it down to years or months or even days. I narrowed it down to hours. I would literally crawl 1 hour at a time. My mind would look at my tasks and my actions that I had to take on 1 hour at a time. And that's how I chipped away at everything, one small piece at a time. I would literally make it through a day. And by the end of the day, I was so damn exhausted because emotionally, it is just a grind and a push day in, day out, and you cannot stop. And I lived that way for about 7 or 8 years. So yes, it's nothing that took a week and a half, a month and a half, or a summer, or a season, or a year. It was damn near a decade of doing that until I got out of the hole. So you want to narrow your vision down. When your back is against the wall financially, don't start thinking about what are you going to do in a year from now? What are you going to do in 5 years from now? Those thoughts will overwhelm you. They'll make you sick to your stomach. They'll actually break you mentally. They will break you, and they will make you quit, and they will make you give up. Can't do it though. You have no choice. And by the way, it's just numbers and it's just money. I know it's easier said than done, but trust me, I live this garbage, okay? If you're drowning in debt, I was where you are, okay? So I know what it's like. I know what it's like to just lie your ass off to everybody. And when everybody says, oh my God, you're doing so great, in your head, you're thinking, I'm drowning in debt. I'm doing horribly, okay? So yes, I've been there. And I remember how it was like it happened 4 minutes ago. Again, I can literally tell you, I was standing at the dishwasher in my kitchen in March of 2009 when Bank of America said no more cash advances, looking out the windows to the back of my house, and was snowing outside. And by the way, I'm in Cleveland, Ohio. So yeah, it still snows in March and April, actually. Sometimes even in the May, I think. But anyways, I get it, okay? If you're drowning in debt, I was where you are. Today, I'm debt free. I never went bankrupt. I came up with a hardcore way to address all of that debt. And yes, I paid all of the debt off, okay? And again, I'm lucky in a sales job. You have a lot of opportunities out there. Now, if you're sitting here saying, Khash, I'm not in sales. Okay, go work a second job. I was working 50 to 60 to 70 to 80 hours a week, okay? If you're a police officer, you're probably working 40 hours a week. If you work for the county or the city or the state government or a regular job, 40 hours a week, that'd be like a picnic to me, okay? Go crank that up to 70, 60, 70, 80 hours. And if your current employer does not give you extra hours, that's fine. There's a lot of jobs in America that are not 50 to 60 hour jobs a week. They're 40-hour jobs. Guess what? Go pick up a second job. Go work nights, go work evenings, go work night shifts, figure something out, okay? You've got to embrace the lifestyle you have to lead in order to get all of this debt addressed. You've got to follow the steps that I gave. I gave all of the steps that it takes to ultimately address the debt and move forward and get out of that type of situation. That is how I stayed away from going bankrupt years ago. And honestly, those principles that I used, I apply them to my business today. We're in a much better place. You'll never catch me saying that we're successful because, I mean, it just depends what you consider to be successful and how everything goes from there. But at the end of the day, follow these steps, and I promise you, you will get out of the situation you're in. It's not forever. It's just a short window of time that you're in. But keep working, keep fighting, and trust me, you'll get out of that hole.